Before this video starts, I just want to give a massive shout out to all my channel members. If you want to receive a shout out, then become a channel member today and you'll be shown on screen like all these other channel members here. Anyways, enjoy the video. In version 11.5, 2 ancient eggs were added, and the pre-existing egg from the update before gained a true form, and ever since then, we now have 22 eggs that can be hatched, and since they all have a wide range on how good and bad they are, I wanted to rank every single egg unit present in the game. For the purposes of this ranking, ancient egg number 000, or the egg for Ape Lord Luza, will not be included, since Luza is way too different from the other egg units. Every egg unit is also being ranked at level 50, since there are some egg units that can go beyond this level, and others can't, so this is the level I would discuss them at to keep it fair. The hatch cost will be shown on screen when discussing an egg unit as well, and if applicable, their stats against behemoths and traits will be shown, and if relevant, mentioned to make a point. Before we get to the ranking, I just want to ask that if you enjoyed this egg ranking video, then be sure to give it a like, and if you enjoy what you see here, then be sure to subscribe to the channel and comment down below your favorite egg unit. With that out of the way, let's hatch open some eggs. Surgeon Cat is... well, let's just say they take the Hippocratic Oath a bit too seriously. Where do I even begin with this unit? Well, let's discuss the positives. This unit is pretty fast, having a good speed set of 22, and they are surge immune. And that's about it. Surgeon has so many flaws as an egg unit. First is honestly partly due to Behemoth Slayer not being able to target all behemoth enemies. Seeing as they only target floating, the only behemoth enemies that their weaken can hit include Hazuku, who is the primary target, and Engabaru, who has much better counters than Surgeon. The issue with trying to hit Hazuku is a combination of both Hazuku's high standing range of 480, Hazuku is also supported by a bunch of enemies that get in the way of Surgeon. Another factor is Hazuku's high base damage, which will one-shot Surgeon unless you have them at level 45 or higher. Surgeon's crowd control being a 30% chance to weaken floating enemies for 3.6 seconds is okay against some of the more aggressive floating enemies. However, all of the floating enemies that you would want to weaken could just be slowed, making them easier to be stalled or even frozen with the likes of Sanzo or Necrodancer. The only situation in which Surgeon would be the more useful of the three is if you were trying to snipe a backlined enemy, but again, you could just take those enemies out with much better LD units. The worst thing about Surgeon is their extremely high behemoth stone cost, costing 13 green and blue stones along with the yellow stone means that the cost for hatching this egg, you are getting very little compared to other eggs that you could have hatched with those stones instead. Fun fact, Ponos gave me a DMCA claim on Twitter for showing Clowncat early. Clowncat screams early game unit. They have really low stats and their slow chance, while it looks great, is only useful if you don't have any other zombie crowd control units. Once you get zombie targeting on Psycho Cat, this unit doesn't do anything that Psycho Cat can't, and actually has a massive thorn that Psycho Cat doesn't, this being Clown's Soul Strike. Soul Strike is an ability that allows units to attack zombie corpses. This is really good on units that can deal great damage, meaning not Clowncat. Even at level 50, they only deal 3.4k damage, so they aren't going to be killing anything, and if you have a stack of them, they will all crowd the corpse instead of pushing the front line. Even before Psycho Cat talents, there are much better options for crowd control, like Gardener and Welterweight, and even Volter Cat. This is even before their true forms, as Clown also has single targeting. This unit gets left behind the moment you can even hatch this egg. As for zombie behemoths, by the time you even run into them, you'll have sufficient options to just deal with them without crowd control. The only two reasons why they're above Surgeon is that their target, while not being that good of a match thanks to Soul Strike, is more niche than floating. The other reason is that their evolution cost isn't the worst thing in the world, only costing 10 purple and red behemoth stones, which unlike the other 3 that you need for Surgeon, are relatively easy to get. Clown wanted to be Pennywise so bad, but they don't have any of the malice that he has. Exorcist suffers the same fate as Clowncat, and that is being a unit that won't do much past the early to mid game. However, there is one thing that puts them above Clowncat. This being that anti-Aku units are harder to come by compared to anti-zombies at the point where you can hatch the egg. This unit is fast, and this is very much a double-edged sword. You can get them into the front lines faster, but if your defenses can't keep up, then they'll just get killed themselves. The fact this unit has single targeting like Clown doesn't do it any favors. Another issue is for the Aku enemies you would face when you hatch this egg, there's a high chance that this is early to mid Aku realms, where it's just easier to brute force these enemies. Against Aku Behemoths, the Faliverin is a sloth variant, so it barely attacks, and Rangmaster outranges them by a huge margin, so it isn't even worth using against Aku Behemoths. This unit could have been neat if they had more range and or even just area attack, but the lack of either of these just means this unit gets left behind as an early game unit. At least they could do a funny permacheese on Infernal Tyrant Neantum sometimes. Armored Firefly sure does light up the night, don't they? This unit is very much an early game unit, seeing as they have really low stats and their evolution cost compared to most eggs is shorter. However, by the time you can hatch this guy, you probably will have already gotten another egg unit that is so much better. What saves this guy from the absolute bottom of the list? This unit could be viable as a mid-game weakener for some melee alien enemies, especially in Cats of the Cosmos restriction stages. A 50% chance to weaken with a relatively fast attack rate means you can consistently weaken enemies if you get at least 2 on the field. This is made easy thanks to them having a cooldown shorter than 5 seconds. However, once you get past this point, there really is no reason to use Armored Firefly since you have probably reached a point where their stats can't keep up with the endgame, along with you having an adequate amount of powerful anti-alien units. For their red targeting, yeah, there's nothing you could really do about that. Their performance against their targetable behemoths is also not great. The only enemy this unit could work on is Ahirijo, but by the time you face them, most players will already have Fried Shrimp or other units that can deal with them well enough. This unit is mainly collection, but at least you can get some use out of it by the time you get the stones needed, as they share the exact same cost as Clown and Exorcist, and this will be the case for every other event gacha egg. Out of all of the Behemoth Calling egg unlocks, Racket is easily the most mid of all of the unlocks. They do a good enough job at what they're supposed to do, knocking back aliens, but against alien behemoths is a no-go, since Scissorrex easily kills her and Pikakiss is knockback immune. They can be useful for dealing with melee alien pushers like Star Pang, Mesmocosmos Cyclone, and Bun Bun Symbiote back, but knockback generally isn't the most useful crowd control ability compared to something like Slow or Freeze, so if you're going to be knocking back enemies, be sure to use it as a way to isolate other enemy types or to use it as a way to regain lost ground. She is slow immune, so you could use her to stun enemies like Queen Bee. Outside of these situations though, you won't really get much use out of her since her offensive stats are extremely poor. There really isn't much else to say about this unit other than the fact that the stone cost is pretty high. 15 of both red and purple stones along with the yellow stone is a bit much. Swinging from the vines is Katarzan, who sadly falls very flat on their face for a few reasons. One of them is that just being one of the first egg units released means that other options added later on became much tastier to crack open. Another issue that Katarzan faces is a lot of competition as an alien attacker, especially with Catalite of all units. While Catalite is more of a meat shield unit, it is funny enough the reason why Catalite tends to perform better than Katarzan. Catalite has slightly higher stats, but also has a faster cooldown and is much cheaper. The only thing Katarzan has over Catalite is that Katarzan has a decent range stat of 310. However, that range difference isn't really enough to carry it too much. However, despite being outclassed on almost all fronts by Catalite, this doesn't make it the worst thing in the world. If you can build up a good stack of them, they can put in some serious work, especially since their attacks are basically non-stop. Unlike Racket Cat, you can use them as a viable option against Scissorrex. However, there's just many units that do their job better, and for the cost of 5 blue and green Behemoth Stones, this unit feels just a bit outdated compared to the other egg units. Out of all of the event gacha eggs, Lion Dance Cat is easily the best of them. As of now, this event egg is the only egg unit exclusive to the Japanese version since the unit wasn't added to the Lunar New Year event pool when version 13.1 dropped. Lion Dance is strong against Traitless and Red, while one of these traits is outclassed like crazy, especially against Behemoths. Even in the early game, the Traitless targeting is actually pretty good for general anti-Traitless. Against Behemoth Traitless though, you wouldn't want to use this unit against them since 2 of the 3 outrange them and the other is Wild Doge. If there was any other mid-game unit with the targeting that was even more niche than Aku, then it would be targeting Traitless, since most of the accessible anti-Traitless units are only available in the late game. Lion Dance can serve as a useful debuffer that you can stack pretty easily thanks to their low cooldown of only 7.2 seconds. Their best matchup is against Arost, an enemy that is a massive struggle for mid-game players. Other mid-game traitless enemies that you could use them on are on the Mohawk Twins. You can argue that Thaumaturge is the better option for these enemies, and in most aspects they would be the better option. However, Lion Dance has one thing over Thaumaturge, and that is damage output. While Lion Dance only has a 50% chance to weaken, they deal almost 8 times the damage and are easier to stack due to their shorter cooldown. Does this mean Lion Dance will be useful for the entire game? As cool as it would be, their single targeting catches up with them eventually to where they end up getting left behind. Add on the fact that better anti-traitless options become available later down the road. If this unit had area attack, it would have easily been an A tier unit at least.
It's a farm boy day, so shop the farm boy way.
Farm Boy Cat is an anti-angel slower who is wave immune and has a good standing range of 350. They also have a massive uptime of 350%, meaning that even though their slow chance is only 50%, once they slow something, the enemy is effectively perma-slowed, unless your luck is terrible. However, their niche of angel slowing is competed with Sanzo Cat, who can already do a good job of slowing angels, and this unit has single targeting, so it even faces competition with Easter Egg Cat, who is also able to slow for over 100% uptime. However, the range is what Farm Boy Cat has over both of these units, to the point where you could even use them to slow Wing Piggy. However, the Pig's Omni Strike is only 10 range short of hitting Farm Boy. While this normally would be a massive issue, Farm Boy's lack of any offensive stats means they don't really need to worry about being weakened by the Pig. However, outside of countering Wing Piggy, their slow isn't really that useful. The only Angel Behemoth unit in the game as of this video is Rajakan, who you should already have a very viable counter for by the time you get to Farm Boy's egg. Granted, being able to slow them and be immune to their waves makes them so much easier to deal with. Speaking of wave immunity, the only other angel that can wave is Yukan, who doesn't really need to be slowed. Also, the cost to hatch their egg for what they're worth is a bit high, costing a massive 20 purple behemoth stones along with 2 red and blue behemoth gems. While this unit can work pretty well for what they do, the massive stone cost means that it isn't practical to get before all the other powerful egg units at this point. Since the idea for Ultra Forms wasn't a thing yet, and especially since they wouldn't give it to a non-Uber, let alone an Advent unit, Fallen Bear Cat is a clone of the other bear variants. However, 3 things set them apart outside their Aku targeting. This being that Fallen Bear has a higher attack stat against their trait when not factoring in treasures compared to the other bears, dealing 16% more damage. However, compared to Assassin and Cadaver, Fallen Bear still deals around 2,000 less damage. Another thing is that Fallen Bear has 25 more range than the other bears, having a range stat of 165. This means that they can more reliably attack melee-based enemies. The most important of these is Aku Gori. The last thing that this bear has that the others don't is Behemoth Slayer. However, this isn't too relevant for Fallen Bear, since the only Aku Behemoth that you would use them for is Feliverin, since they have a hard time reaching Rank Master. Getting back to the Aku Gori topic, this unit outranges them by 5, but it's enough to deal a massive chunk of damage against Aku Gori, who's considered one of the most notorious Aku enemies in the game thanks to their ability to delete most units in a few hits, even outside of the Savage Blow. Outside of being an Aku Gori counter, there really isn't much you would use them for, and when we look at the evolution cost, I believe this is the second highest cost to hatch an egg in the game, only behind Ape Lord Luza. So if you're in that much of a desperate need for an Aku Gori counter, be sure to check in with your doctor what it means to live with 1 kidney. Be careful when handling this egg, as you might get poked with a nasty thorn. Cactus Cat is an anti-Aku meat shield and is the first of these eggs that doesn't have Behemoth Slayer. Cactus is a pretty good anti-Aku meat shield and can dish out some decent damage. They are also surge immune, meaning they can handle walking into a field of death surges. They can also work as a supplementary surge immune meat shield alongside with Gato Amigo. However, as an anti-Aku meat shield, they do face quite a bit of competition with Belly Dance Cat. While Cactus uses their natural bulk to tank hits, Belly Dance uses their ability to tank hits and dodge Aku hits. However, once you unlock Cone Cat, both of these units tend to get outclassed as an anti-Aku meat shield, at least at level 50. What Belly Dance can do that Cactus can't is get boosts. Eventually, Cactus will get left behind as an anti-Aku meat shield, but as for the surge immunity, they can still work as a fine meat shield. With all this said, there is one major thorn that Cactus has to contend with when it comes to their viability, and this is their evolution cost. They cost 10 of every single stone, meaning that their viability is a bit worse for a mid-game player, since yellow stones are hard to come by before beating Dogamaru. Getting this unit is difficult, but can be worth the stone investment if you're still in the middle of the Aku realms. As I was making this ranking and looking over the other eggs, this unit just kept climbing the list all the way up to here. Gas Mask Cat, when they were first released, had the perception that it was a terrible unit. However, as time passed, Gas Mask Cat began to be seen in a brighter light. Gas Mask is an anti-black meat shield, but not in the way that you would consider a normal meat shield, in the way that they go into the front lines to defend your attackers. Rather, they fall under the concept of a range meat shield. A unit, while a meat shield, acts more like a second line of defense. While they have a much higher cost and a longer cooldown, the range makes this a little bit negligible compared to a regular meat shield. They have a solid health stat against regular black enemies, and they're extremely useful against the various black behemoths, especially Dark Joe, whose toxic is negated thanks to Gas Mask's toxic immunity. However, their competition before the endgame as an anti-black meat shield is quite literally just collab meat shields. However, once you do get Jetpack, there really is no reason to pick up this unit. Until you do get to that point, however, Gas Mask can serve as a viable secondary wall against black enemies. For the third meat shield in a row, we have Haniwa Cat. Haniwa Cat is a pretty good specialist meat shield for a huge chunk of the game. Unlike the other Empress Excavation eggs, Haniwa is pretty cheap to evolve, only requiring 10 red and purple stones. What you get in return is an anti-traitless meat shield whose effective health at level 40 is higher than a level 50 Manic Eraser against traitless. Haniwa is able to make many mid-game stages so much easier thanks to being able to tank more than one hit from enemies like Manic Mohawk, Manic Island, Arost, Autosmack You, and so much more. They're even more valuable for the Little Cat True Form stages due to the special and rare restriction limiting your options for good meat shields. Their matchup against traitless behemoths isn't the worst thing in the world either. At level 50, they can survive a 200% Wild Doge hit, a Strength Gallus hit, and can tank 4 hits against Popo. This makes them a valuable asset when dealing with these enemies in some stages. However, they do have a rather low base health stat, so this unit could struggle to be a good meat shield against mixed stages or against other non-traitless behemoth enemies. Their slow speed also makes it so they take a long while to get to the front lines and could possibly clog your cat limit. They also struggle with the notorious 3 traitless enemies of Henry, Crockley, and Mr. Mole, since their status effects effectively shut down Haniwa's ability to tank, but outside of these 3, Haniwa is a pretty good meat shield for most traitless enemies. They don't really fall off until you start doing Starred Uncanny Legends of all places. The main thing that does hold them back quite a bit is that low base health, but they are still great in traitless stages for an absolute majority of the game. Cobcat is what happens when you're tasked with making a seasonal variant of Pizza Cat. However, in saying that, Cobcat is still a very good unit since they do share quite a bit with Pizza. While they might have lower base stats, Cobb has a much faster attack rate, a shorter cooldown, and is slightly faster. Pizza in turn has 20 more range and more knockbacks. What they differ in most is their abilities. While Pizza deals massive damage against black enemies, Cobb is strong against traitless and is a behemoth slayer. Cobb is surprisingly tanky against traitless enemies, having over 100,000 effective health against them. Throw on the Behemoth Slayer ability, and against traitless behemoths, they become an extremely good tank and have a DPS value that is very similar to Pizza's against black enemies. Effectively, what this means is that Cobb works as a second Pizza. Now, what is their matchup against traitless enemies in general? Their ability to tank several hits against them means they can reliably dish out some pretty good damage. Them only having 2 knockbacks means that even against fast attacking traitless enemies that outrange them like Arost and Rain D, they can still endure enough hits to deal some valuable damage. For traitless behemoths, they can easily delete Wild Doge in 2 hits and tank several Gallus hits, especially due to them not having the fastest attack rate in the world, and even against Popo, they can deliver some pretty meaningful damage. Something that is of note is that during the last stage of the Cappy Kawano levels, Cobb is a somewhat viable option during the Cappy Jr. phase due to outranging them, being able to tank a few hits, and dish out meaningful damage against them. Now you might ask yourself, why isn't Cobb any higher in this list if he's already this good? Well, the simple answer is that there's a unit that does their job much better as an anti-traitless unit, but we'll discuss that when I get there. Cop is somewhat pricey to evolve too. However, unlike Farm Boy, this evolution cost is very much worth the cost for what is essentially Pizza Cat 2.0 for a trait that doesn't have the highest number of specialists. Chief Cat is the 7th egg obtained from the Behemoth culling stages and is an anti-zombie attacker. Chief Cat is able to dish out great damage against a ton of zombies and is able to outrange a huge majority of them, as most zombie enemies are melee attackers. They're one of the few units in which Soul Strike is actually a good thing for them. Soul Strike as an ability really only works on offensive units due to the fact that the ability is just about trying to finish off a rotten corpse before it revives, if not at least chip them down a good amount. Chief works as a Soul Striker because of this, especially since most zombies don't revive with full health. Their mini-waves should only be treated as a bonus due to their somewhat low activation rate of only 30%. As a Behemoth Slayer, Chief works extremely well against Ariant, who is effectively one-shot by a level 50 Chief due to Chief dealing 145,000 damage against zombie behemoths, and Ariant only appears at 200% outside of a few Cats of the Cosmos outbreak levels. They do struggle somewhat against Engelbaru due to their fast attack rate, but they can still land some hits against them. As an anti-zombie attacker, the main competition they face is with Cadaver Bear Cat. However, I think that both of these units work better together than as two separate units. Of course, in situations where you can only bring one or the other, it is usually better to bring Cadaver Bear due to their cheaper cost, faster cooldown, and dealing 20,000 more damage against zombies, but the thing is that Chief can actually cover many of the flaws Cadaver Bear has. Cadaver Bear struggles with outraging enemies that have unburrowed, so Chief can cover after Cadaver Bear gets a hit on an unburrowing zombie. Another thing is that you might sometimes miss a Z-kill, so Chief's Soul Strike means they're able to ensure that Cadaver Bear doesn't have to struggle with some zombies afterwards. They're somewhat expensive to evolve, but they can be a massive asset that can save you tons of trouble with zombies, especially if you don't have Cadaver Bear unlocked yet. Supercar Cat is the definition of min-maxing. They have absolutely no health at all, but if they land even a single hit, it can single-handedly change the tide of a battle. They dish out a massive 81,000 damage against their target, knock them back, and if they have one, break their Aku Shield or Barrier. Supercar is a unit that rewards timing in a very good way. While Supercar won't be useful on enemies that attack fast or hit a very large area, they most definitely will make an impact on a huge ton of enemies. For example, one Supercar hit will fully knock back Fallen Bear even on the highest currently present magnifications due to their sheer damage stat. They are extremely useful against many of the major boss enemies due to the fact that not many of them attack super fast. For example, Possessed Empress becomes pretty trivial if you use Supercar due to the fact that you have many chances to land a hit and destroy her shield. Another boss in which Supercar is useful for is Zerolouza, especially if you haven't acquired Awakened Doron, since you don't have many options to actually keep the big ape away from your base. If you pair this unit with the Thunderbolt Cannon, they can more easily land their hits against several of their targets if they lack some sort of shield. This unit does falter in levels with a bunch of weaker enemies that might get in the way of hitting your intended target. Also, they aren't the most useful against enemies with naturally high knockback counts, since Brute Force will usually just be enough to knock them back. Also, their extremely low health stat does mean that if anything touches them at all, they will die. They do cost quite a bit of stones to hatch open, but if you take the time to master Supercar timing, then you will be rewarded greatly. If you have the spare resources and want to master Supercar timing, crack this egg open. Similar to how Cop was kind of like a seasonal variant of Pizza, Cat Egg Pod is like an event variant of Green Shell Cat. They are both units that get one hit in and sit there as a temporary wall, either to help stall an attacking thread, or act as checkpoints in the event you get pushed. Cat Egg Pod has less health than Green Shell against non-behemoths, but in exchange deals a ton more damage, especially against behemoth enemies. They also trade Green Shell's wave immunity for surge immunity, so in levels where surges are prevalent, Egg Pod may be the better option. This unit can be used as a one-time nuke against some behemoth enemies, and at level 50, deals just enough damage to one-shot 200% wild dodge. Normally, I wouldn't bring up the more niche stat of behemoth dodge, since on most units, it is just a bonus that doesn't affect their overall viability, but for Cat Egg Pod, it makes them absurdly tanky against behemoths, to the point that it's uber levels of tankiness. They have a 50% chance to dodge behemoth attacks for 2 seconds. This unit can easily wall behemoths for a lot longer than usual since most behemoths attack fast, being able to easily set off the dodge ability. The only behemoths that could chew through their health somewhat quickly are the stat-based threats like Wild Doge and those with waves and toxic like Dianel and Dark Joe. This unit really is just a nice addition against the various behemoth enemies that you need to face, and this is just a good tanker that can dish out some good chip damage. The evolution cost may be somewhat steep, but the value you get from this unit is absolutely worth it. The number one thing video game sweats fear. A bar of soap that runs towards you. Soap Cat makes it to the top 5 of this hard-boiled list. Soap is essentially an alien version of Ro, having a gigantic health pool against their targets and being able to weaken said trait. However, Soap is also immune to slow and is a behemoth slayer. This allows Soap to reach absurd stats against alien behemoths, a massive 787,000 health before getting a weaken effect in. With the weaken effect applied, Soap's effective health shoots up to a mind-bending 1.57 million health against weakened alien behemoths, and is the second highest effective health out of any non-uber rare unit in the game, only behind a massively boosted Ro that weakens a red enemy. Even when facing regular aliens, Soap is very much an effective tanker unit that can make a ton of alien heavy stages so much easier. Soap having a very fast speed of 25 means you won't have to really worry about them not making it to the front line. However, there is one catch to Soap taking aliens. Soap is not warp immune, meaning in stages with starry aliens, they can be sent back, leaving your other units vulnerable to the onslaught of enemy attacks. Their slow immunity is meant to counter Scissorex, but can make enemies like Queen Bee and Super Hippo much easier to fight, especially if they can get them weakened. For how simple yet effective Soap is as an anti-alien tank, I'd say unlocking them is worth the high amount of behemoth stones needed. Barrel Cat is a unit that, when released, single-handedly make Aku as a trait much easier to fight for a few reasons. The first and biggest of these reasons is that Barrel has a 60% chance to pierce the Aku shield. This chance is the same chance as a talented Seafarer's chance to freeze, to get an idea of just how often they can pierce shields. Another reason is that the fact that they're an LD unit, being able to snipe enemies that might sit further back, like Fallen Bear and Le Behemoth. Lastly is their pretty high health pool against Aku enemies. At level 50, they have over 85,000 health against Aku enemies, allowing them to tank several hits, giving them multiple chances to pierce their shield. They're also surge immune, allowing them to walk through the various death surges these enemies like to summon. As for their Aku Behemoth matchup, unlike Fallen Bear, Barrel is actually able to work against Rangmaster, making them a whole lot easier to fight against, as you can easily cut what is effectively 1 million health over the course of a few hits. Their usage against the Feliveran is more of using Barrel as a tank more than anything, since the Feliveran's shield is really easily to break naturally due to their slow attack rate and the fact that the shield health is really low. Barrel is also extremely useful for a few of the Malevolent stages, such as Malevolent Mohawk, Malevolent Dark, and Malevolent Lion. This unit does struggle to crack open some of the shorter range shields due to Barrel's LD, but most enemies that Barrel can't hit are enemy peons like Miss Devil and Aku Doge. Against other Aku bosses, Barrel can easily work on all of the shielded ones due to their rather slow attack rates. For example, Gigando can easily get his shield broken by Barrel due to Barrel tanking his hits and walking up to the shield and breaking it. Barrel as a unit is an amazing unit that makes a ton of fights against Akus a much less daunting ordeal, as you're effectively cutting down the health of a ton of enemies by a huge margin. Their evolution cost is also relatively cheap for when you get their egg, only needing 15 red and purple with 1 yellow behemoth stone. So if you find yourself struggling with shield piercing, pick up this Barrel and they'll easily crack them open for you. And the bronze winner of this ranking is Mushroom Cat, an anti-angel attacker who is also a behemoth slayer. Mushroom Cat is a unit that was very much needed when it released, since the amount of good, cheap anti-angel attackers who were in an Ultra Soul were basically non-existent before Mushroom dropped. Mushroom is a unit that works extremely well against their target, with a very good standing range of 290, leaving very few angels that can outrange Mushroom. At level 50, Mushroom deals over 40,000 damage against angels, making them much easier to grind through. As a Behemoth Slayer, Mushroom is able to work as a generalist Behemoth Slayer, as they are one of the few Behemoth Slayers with high enough offensive stats to deal meaningful damage outside of their specialty. Speaking of their specialty, Mushroom makes Rajakan so much easier to fight, dealing enough damage to effectively juggle him around. This is helped by Mushroom's wave immunity. Speaking of said immunity, it makes Mushroom a viable wave immune attacker and an amazing unit to use when dealing with Yukan. However, there are a few things that Mushroom does struggle with. The main thing being is that Mushroom doesn't have the highest endurance in the world, so they're very prone to getting juggled by enemies that outrange them. One of these enemies being Angelic Sleipnir, as they have a fast attack rate that can easily send this fungi back without them getting a single hit in. Another issue Mushroom has is that they can sometimes miss their attack against some of the more melee-based angel enemies due to their high knockback count, mainly against Gabriel and Angelic Gori. However, besides these two things, Mushroom is a really great unit in general and makes facing angels so much easier, and while they're a bit expensive to evolve, I highly recommend hatching this fungi open as soon as you can. Taking the runner-up spot for this list is Hitman, an LD anti-traitless attacker that is both freeze and wave immune. As an anti-traitless specialist, their niche is hard to come by, so that gives this unit so much value. At level 50, this unit deals nearly 90,000 damage per hit against traitless enemies, making a ton of them much easier to deal with. They have a pretty high standing range of 300, allowing them to outrange threats such as Arost, Mr. Mur, and are able to hit Rain D with even one range's worth of stepping stones. Their wave immunity allows them to outrange basically every single traitless enemy who can summon waves outside of the Titan family and the Mammoth, meaning they will be kept safe. Speaking of wave immunity, this allows them to be a good generalist wave immune attacker, as they can outrange most wave enemies and deal a good amount of damage against them. As a generalist LD unit, they aren't the strongest as they face stiff competition with the likes of Housewife and Fiend Cat, but you can use them as a 4-star replacement. Their freeze immunity isn't the most helpful thing in the world generally, but the one traitless enemy with the relevant freeze is Henry. Henry, being notorious for having frustrating freezes, means that having a unit that deals a huge chunk of damage while being immune to his freeze makes Henry so much less of an ordeal to deal with. Observant players notice that this unit shares many traits with D'Artagnan, who is an Epic Fest Uber who is also wave immune, LD, and deals massive damage against traitless. Hitman effectively becomes a pocket D'Artagnan, as Hitman deals exactly the same damage as an unstrengthened D'Artagnan, but only has half the DPS. While D'Artagnan has 5 times the health, Hitman has a cooldown that is 8 times faster. This means that Hitman works as a much more disposable version of D'Artagnan that could do a ton of work if the stack is kept alive. Hitman can struggle against fast enemies with the short range, as it does take Hitman a moment to land their attack, so fast melee enemies like Wild Doge, Delphina, and Boar Jr. can all slip into their blind spot. However, this can be easily avoided with good meat shielding. Hitman is the third and final unit on this ranking that lacks Behemoth Slayer. This was probably done to prevent them from being able to nuke any traitless behemoth enemy out of this game. Hitman's cost to hatch is extremely high with those 12 yellow behemoth stones, but cracking this bad boy open is so worth it for the fact that Hitman is one of the best anti-traitless units in the game, and the fact that they work in 4-star stages is another bonus.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
If you know anything about these eggs, then it should have been pretty obvious on who the best egg was. Courier's influence on the meta is so insane that I have an entire video covering why Courier is such a controversial unit that you can check out after this video, but I will give a shorter explanation on why Courier is the best egg unit in this game. Courier has so many things going on for it. First off, they're the cheapest egg in the entire game to hatch, only needing 5 purple and 5 red behemoth stones. Also, the fact that you only need to beat 5 culling stages means that you can get Courier as early as after Empire of Cats Chapter 3, though it's more realistic to get them after Into the Future Chapter 1 when you unlock the desert stages. Hatching this unit in their early game is effectively unleashing a nuclear warhead against a huge chunk of Stories of Legend. Courier is the generalist anti-behemoth unit you will bring everywhere, as the only other unit that could work as a generalist behemoth slayer is Mushroom, but Mushroom isn't as effective as Courier. Courier is also extremely fast and has a very short force wing, meaning they can hit enemies that you wouldn't think they could, especially provided with a good stepping stone, such as Master A, Raging Bahamut, Arost, and so much more. Their high speed also allows them to easily slip into the blind spot of several enemies, such as Cleonel, the Twin Bees, and Mr. Mole. As for their anti-red matchup, Courier is able to deal an absurd amount of damage against red enemies, and with that fast attack rate, can quickly dispatch most red enemies in just a few seconds. The only red enemy Courier can struggle with is Professor A, but that's mainly due to their slow, decent damage, and fast attack rate, preventing Courier from reaching them. Courier also has a very fast cooldown of only 6.53 seconds, meaning that they're very easy to spam, and this is further shown if you run research combos. Courier's LD is another reason why they're so broken, as they can easily hit targets well behind enemy lines, and due in combination with their speed, can easily rush down the base in several levels, such as No Plan A. Seeing as Courier is the first of 3 Behemoth Slayers, along with Hanuma and Katarzan, Courier effectively set the standard for all Behemoths in the future, since each enemy would need to be strong enough to not get rolled by this delivery service. Think of all the crazy high stats Behemoth enemies have. Part of this is because most would just get steamrolled by Courier otherwise. Courier is so powerful that Ponus was afraid to give us another unit as strong as them. I could go on and on about how Courier is omega busted, but I already have a whole video about that you can check here. With that being said, I can confidently say that Courier is easily the best egg in the game, but even perhaps one of the strongest non-Uber units in this game. This video has been my ranking for all 21 egg units, outside of Luza, since they're too different compared to the other eggs. While some of these eggs may be quite rotten, others are served as a part of a 5-star meal. If you enjoyed this ranking of these eggs, then be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and comment down below your favorite egg unit, or any details I may have missed, or any disagreements you might have with my ranking. Also, shout out to the following channel members: Something Something YouTube and Potato King for being silver members or higher. If you want to receive a shout out like these channel members here, then become a channel member today, as it's a way to support me in the way that helps keep the lights on, and channel members also receive an exclusive role in my Discord server, for which you can find a link to in the description down below. Anyways, I hope you have a wonderful day.